Every country has them. The loud ones, the flashy ones, the ones society loves to mock. In Britain, we call them chavs, but the word isn't just an insult. It's a mirror that reflects class, culture, and who we think we are. Every word has a birthplace. Chav didn't start in the tabloids or the comedy sketches. It began as a small, simple word, chavi, in the language of the Romani people. It meant child or young person. Nothing more. Over centuries, travelling Romani communities mingled with working-class towns across southern England. Chavi slipped into local slang, a friendly lad, a mate, a kid from round here. Then something changed. By the late 20th century, a whisper in Kent and the Medway towns, Chatham especially, turned chav into shorthand for rough youth. Locals even joked that it stood for Chatham average. It didn't, but the myth stuck, and myths are powerful. The early 2000s made chav a national obsession. Tabloids splashed headlines about a new menace in Burberry caps. Sketch shows like Little Britain and the Catherine Tate Show turned the accent, the outfit, the attitude into punchlines. The word leapt from local slang into a cultural weapon. It no longer meant child. It meant undesirable. Newspapers called it the new class war. Mocking chavs became a socially acceptable way to sneer at the poor. Yet behind the laughter was anxiety, the fear of Britain's changing identity, globalization, reality TV, the collapse of traditional industries, a country uncertain who it wanted to be found relief in who it could ridicule. Sociologists began to take notice. They called chav bashing one of the last open prejudices, classism disguised as taste. You could never say certain words about race or gender, but you could still say chav. This word travelled faster than its meaning. Within years, chav appeared in the Oxford English Dictionary, a young lower-class person displaying brash and loutish behaviour. But words don't describe reality, they shape it. When people heard chav, they didn't think of individuals. They imagined a caricature, tracksuit, fake tan, cheap jewellery, loud voice. Every stereotype needs a costume, and chav found its uniform. Burberry check, gold chains, white trainers. Style once worn proudly in working-class communities suddenly became a national punchline. Fashion houses panicked. Burberry even dropped its signature check after tabloids called it chav chic. But here's the irony. The same media that mocked the look couldn't stop selling it back to us. Pop stars wore it. Footballers flaunted it. Designers repackaged it. The insult became the aesthetic. Beneath it all lies a deeper story, one about class and aspiration. Working-class Britain has always been loud, proud, and inventive. From the docks of Liverpool to the terraces of Manchester, people built community out of hardship. Chav, however, blurred that heritage with the behaviour society found embarrassing. Instead of asking why some people felt alienated, Britain just gave them a label and a laugh track. It's worth remembering. The same decade that invented chav also invented reality fame, influencer culture, and the idea that visibility equals value. The chav was simply the first person to live that contradiction in public. In this story, class is only the surface. What lies underneath is something universal. The human need to belong, to be seen, and to be respected. That's why we start here, not with mockery, but with meaning. The word chav has travelled from a Romani cradle to global pop culture, but its journey has only begun. Because now we have to ask the harder question. If chaviness isn't really about class, then what is it? For decades, British society has blurred two very different ideas. Being working class and being chavvy, they're not the same. Real working-class life is built on discipline, pride, and community, not chaos. It's the postman who still says good morning, the bus driver who knows half the passengers by name, the families who keep the same terraced house spotless for 30 years. Chaviness, on the other hand, is performance, a kind of loud rebellion against restraint. It wears confidence like armor and volume like perfume. It isn't a class. It's a style of defiance. You'll find it everywhere. In cheap nightclubs, yes, but also at expensive beach bars in Ibiza, where middle-class kids drink until sunrise and chant football songs on the sand. You'll find it in reality TV villas, celebrity parties, even private school holidays. Money doesn't cure vulgarity. Sometimes it funds it. Absolutely Fabulous showed us that years ago. Edina and Patsy weren't struggling single mums from estates. They were wealthy, successful women. But their behavior, flashy, self-absorbed, and gloriously tasteless, was pure Chav energy in designer clothes. So if chaviness crosses every income bracket, what exactly defines it? It's attitude, a public declaration that I'll do what I want. It's the loss of shame, and not the healthy kind that frees people, but the dangerous kind that erases boundaries. Sociologists call this the democratization of bad taste. The internet amplified it. Platforms rewarded outrage, not decency. Being loud became being seen, and being seen became the new success. Yet in all of this, working-class Britain quietly carried on. Builders still built, nurses still worked weekends, grandparents still helped raise the kids. The people holding society together rarely make it to prime time. So let's separate the two. Working class is a social reality, earning a living, paying rent, relying on each other. Chaviness is a behavioral choice, a cultural export that anyone can adopt, from Essex to LA. The problem begins when the two are confused, because when we equate working class with chav, we turn ordinary people into caricatures. We insult the cleaner, the plumber, the care worker, people whose dignity has nothing to do with Burberry caps or binge drinking. Every culture has this same confusion. In America, ratchet behavior isn't limited to the poor. It thrives in celebrity culture. In France, racaille, street energy, has its upper-class imitators. In Australia, bogan jokes are told by the very people they describe. The truth is that chaviness is universal. It's humanity's ongoing flirtation with excess, spectacle, and ego. There's nothing wrong with joy or noise, or even rebellion. Every generation needs release. But when rebellion becomes identity, when spectacle becomes virtue, society loses something vital: aspiration. Aspiration once meant climbing higher, learning more, treating others well. Now for many, it simply means being noticed. And that's where the chav myth becomes dangerous, because it tempts us all. Whether we're posting on social media or partying on holiday, we're all told that visibility is victory. But the quieter virtues, patience, kindness, responsibility, never trend. That's what true working-class culture understood. It wasn't about shouting the loudest, it was about getting on with it. The British working class gave us trade unions, music, comedy, and the NHS, not because it was glamorous, but because it was grounded. The line between working class and chav culture matters, because how we draw it decides who we respect. When we label every loud accent or cheap outfit as chav, we mock resilience. When we romanticize chaviness as authenticity, we reward dysfunction. Somewhere between snobbery and celebration lies sanity, a place where decency and individuality can coexist. So the question isn't, how do we get rid of chavs? It's, how do we stop mistaking noise for strength? And perhaps more importantly, what fills the silence once we do? Because a culture that no longer knows how to admire restraint eventually learns to admire nothing at all. By the time Britain learned to laugh at the Chav, something unexpected happened. The world began to copy it. What started as mockery became marketing. Chav chic exploded across runways. Burberry, once terrified of its own check, brought it back as luxury. Celebrities wore tracksuits ironically. Designers sold rebellion at £800 a hoodie. The insult became the outfit. The same behavior once condemned on council estates became celebrated on catwalks. It wasn't transformation, it was chavification, a cultural remix that stripped the attitude of its context and sold it back to the middle class. Pop culture thrives on paradox. The Chav was everything the middle class feared, and everything their children secretly admired: confidence, color, and chaos. As YouTube and later TikTok rose, Chav aesthetics found a new life. Filters replaced fashion, volume became visibility. Being loud was no longer local, it was algorithmic. Online, Chav energy became global currency, part brag, part brand. The internet loves extremes, louder, faster, shinier. So chaviness, once mocked, fit the platform perfectly. But with imitation came amnesia. Few remembered that the original Chav stereotype had mocked real people, working-class youth trying to find identity in a changing world. Now those same symbols, gold hoops, fake tan, tracksuits, were worn by influencers with million-pound sponsorships. The working class lost ownership of its own image. Sociologists call this cultural laundering. Take something from the margins, clean it up, resell it to the mainstream. It happened with hip-hop in America, punk in the 70s, and now with Chav culture. And through this cycle, the media tells us that identity itself is just another accessory. But chaviness has never been just about fashion. It's about aspiration twisted inside out. It says, "I'll look rich even if I'm not." It's bravado born from humiliation, a way of saying, "You can't ignore me." Yet when brands profit from that performance, the edge disappears. Rebellion turns into product placement. And that's where Britain and much of the world stands today, proud of the look, uncomfortable with the truth. The Chav became a meme. But memes flatten complexity. They make people into punchlines. What we're left with is the hollow echo of authenticity. We say keeping it real, but we mean keeping it marketable. There's a strange comfort in that. It lets everyone join the joke. The middle class can wear the aesthetic without the stigma. The working class can laugh to avoid offense. The brands make profit. Everyone wins, except truth. Culture always mirrors its economy. When stability fades, style shouts louder. And in that noise, chaviness becomes both a symptom and a soundtrack, the sound of a society selling itself back its own reflection. But this story isn't finished. Because if we've turned Chav culture into a meme, we have to ask, what happens when the meme starts shaping the culture that created it? Every culture needs a compass, something that points north when fashion, politics, and popularity start pulling in every other direction. For generations, Britain's compass came from a shared sense of decency. You didn't need to be religious to understand it. It was written into manners, music, humor, into the quiet idea that dignity mattered. But somewhere between the memes and the marketing, that compass slipped. When the loudest voices set the tone, silence starts to sound like weakness. When ridicule becomes entertainment, respect feels old-fashioned. In this new economy of attention, outrage pays better than integrity. We used to look up to people for their skill or service. Now we look up to whoever looks back from a camera. And when fame itself becomes the prize, any behavior that gets noticed will eventually be copied. That's why chaviness spread beyond class, because it rewards visibility. It says, if I can't win the game, I'll crash it loud enough for everyone to notice. But no civilization survives on rebellion alone. A culture needs limits, not to cage people, but to keep them human. The moment we stop believing in restraint, chaos starts dressing itself as freedom. And restraint is more than politeness. It's the discipline that makes creativity possible, the patience that makes families possible, the humility that keeps success bearable. The problem isn't that people want to express themselves, it's that they've forgotten what's worth expressing. Every culture that forgets that ends up drifting, brilliant, noisy, directionless. So where do we find a compass again? Some look to politics, some to psychology, some to nostalgia. But historically, Britain looked to something deeper, Christianity. Not as control, but as conscience. A quiet reminder that life isn't just about what we can do, but what we should do. In the book of Matthew, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. Salt preserves what is good. Light reveals what is true." For centuries, that simple teaching acted as moral gravity, invisible but indispensable. It didn't dictate taste or class, it offered balance. When that salt loses its savor, when that light dims, society doesn't collapse overnight, it just loses flavor. Maybe that's what we're missing. Not religion as ritual, but faith as framework. A shared belief that human dignity still matters even when it isn't trending. Because a moral compass doesn't just point north, it keeps us from spinning. So if Chav culture reflects our confusion, perhaps rediscovering humility and meaning could be the start of finding direction again. Britain's moral story isn't written only in law or politics, it's written in quiet habits. Honesty, fairness, forgiveness, patience. For centuries, those virtues drew their shape from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Churches once stood at the heart of every town. You didn't need to believe to be influenced. Their bells marked time, their values marked behavior. They reminded people that every life carried worth, the dock worker, the nurse, the child on the estate. Human dignity was not earned, it was assumed. That belief acted like infrastructure. Roads and roofs can crumble and be rebuilt, but when moral foundations weaken, the collapse is slower and deeper. The Gospel's metaphors still speak plainly today. In Matthew 5:13-16, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." Salt preserves, light reveals. Salt keeps what is good from rotting. Light keeps truth from hiding. Together, they suggest something simple. A society survives when its people protect goodness and expose darkness, quietly, consistently, without applause. The question isn't whether Britain is still Christian. It's whether it still remembers why those ideals mattered. Because when the moral reference fades, we start to improvise our own truth. Right and wrong become opinions. Popularity becomes virtue. The result is what we see everywhere. Noise without guidance, freedom without meaning. Yet moral renewal rarely begins in palaces or parliaments. It begins in kitchens, classrooms, and small acts of mercy. The same humility that once built hospitals and schools can still rebuild trust and culture. When Christ spoke of light, he didn't mean a spotlight. He meant the candle in a window, steady, ordinary, guiding someone home. If we understood that again, Chav culture, and every culture, could rediscover its dignity. Because salt and light are not decorations, they are disciplines. To preserve what is good is not to cling to the past, but to protect the possibility of the future. To shine is not to boast, but to make seeing possible. In that sense, Christianity remains one of humanity's most radical ideas, that every person is both flawed and sacred, and that redemption is possible, individually and collectively. Whether you believe or not, you live downstream of that idea. And perhaps remembering it is how a confused culture begins to find its way home. The word chav may be British, but the story isn't. Every society invents a version of the same character, loud, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. America calls it ratchet or white trash. Australia says bogan. France, rasail. Russia, gopnik. Japan, Yankee. Different words, same anxiety, the line between authenticity and embarrassment. I saw this contrast most clearly somewhere far from London, in St. Lucia, the island my family comes from. I stayed at a resort in the north, sunset over the Caribbean, calm and dignified. Among the guests was a group of African Americans, young, confident, out to have fun. Loud, playful, but by British standards, shockingly chavvy. They weren't aggressive, just big. Big laughter, big voices, big drama. And in that moment, I realized how different cultural lenses can be. Locals, St. Lucians, warm and restrained, watched politely. No one said a word. But you could feel the cultural dissonance, two worlds of expression colliding under the same Caribbean sun. Back in the UK, the same behavior would be branded chav. In America, it might be called ratchet. Either way, the danger is identical. We start judging an entire people by the noisiest examples of it. The truth is, every culture has its performers, the ones who push boundaries, who test patience, who attract cameras. They remind us of freedom, but they also remind us how easily freedom slips into spectacle. Social media erased borders, but it also standardized rebellion. American pop culture exports its loudest voices. The rest of the world copies them, remixing the aesthetic while losing the nuance. The chav, the ratchet, the bogan, they've become global archetypes, proof that class anxiety and showmanship are universal. But it's worth asking, what happens when those archetypes become role models? When children grow up believing attitude matters more than achievement? Every culture pays a price for glamorizing its extremes. Yet the solution isn't censorship or snobbery, it's discernment. The ability to separate celebration from imitation, to enjoy confidence without confusing it for wisdom, to enjoy fun without mistaking it for freedom. The chav exists in every nation because ego does, and the only antidote to ego is humility, the quiet strength that needs no stage. Maybe that's what the global mirror shows us, not how different we are, but how alike. Each society wrestling with the same question. How do we stay expressive without losing respect? Music swells, world instrument blend. And perhaps if we can answer that, we might rediscover something old and valuable. The idea that true confidence whispers, it doesn't shout. We've followed the word chav from its humble Romani roots to the glare of global media. We've seen how mockery became marketing and how culture traded dignity for noise. But beneath every fashion, every meme, every stereotype lies the same truth. People just want to matter. Whether they shout it or whisper it, everyone's asking the same question. Do I count? The danger isn't chav culture itself. It's forgetting that behind every label is a person. When we judge an entire community by its loudest members, we blind ourselves to the millions quietly doing what's right, working, raising families, staying kind in a world that no longer rewards it. Maybe that's what the Chav story was trying to show us all along. That style without substance is empty, and rebellion without purpose is just noise. Culture always reflects character. If we want better culture, we need better character in ourselves, not just others. And that starts small. In how we treat strangers, in how we speak about people we'll never meet, in how we choose dignity over derision. The old teaching still holds. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. It was never about power. It was about presence. The quiet power of people who refuse to let cynicism win. Every time you choose patience instead of mockery, you add salt. Every time you see truth and speak it gently, you shine light. Do that long enough, and even a culture lost in its own reflection can start to see clearly again. Because the curious case of the Chav isn't just about Britain, it's about all of us, our hunger for meaning, our search for respect, and our choice every day between spectacle and substance. Maybe the answer was never hiding. Maybe it was waiting for us to look inward, quietly, honestly, and choose light. If this film made you think, if it made you see class, culture, or even yourself a little differently, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe for the next episode of The Curious Case. Because understanding culture might just be the first step to changing it.